This is the FAA Part 107 Exam Study Guide for 2025, and this video will be on random topics. We'll be going over detailed information in regard to everything that has not been covered, so get ready. The Remote Pilot Study Guide 2025 Part 12 of 12 starts now. During the last few weeks, I've been using these videos and your comments and questions to gauge what it is that the FAA is asking on the Part 107 exam. As you probably already know, each person is given a different set of questions, and based on those facts alone, that means, in theory, the exams are not equal. Some exams will be more difficult and some will be much easier. So in retrospect, it means that the exams will be unequally unfair. And this video, 12 of 12, is meant to give you an unfair advantage. My intention is to uncover everything that has not been covered in the previous videos, and also to expose topics and information that have been placed on the Part 107 exams but have not been mentioned in regard to the material that needs to be covered on study guides when taking or prior to taking this exam. And before I get started, I want to thank all of you who have provided significant input in regard to the questions that are being asked on this exam, and we're going to go over all of them in this video right now. Let's go. One of the Part 107 questions that keeps coming up all the time by surprise is, what are the control devices that manipulate the movement of an airplane? And the same subscriber who provided this information also wanted to know, why do we need to know this if we're only flying drones? Well, the FAA answer to that question is because they want you to be aware of the maneuverability of a manned aircraft, so that way, when you have an emergency or avoidance procedure, you will understand how to manipulate the controls of your drone in accordance to what you have learned about a manned aircraft's maneuverability. So let me explain the details. There is a specific area inside of an aircraft where you can refer to as being the point or the center of gravity. This center of gravity point will have three lines intersecting with it. First will be a longitudinal access line, the second will be a latitude access line, and the third will be a vertical access line. These three lines are what will allow the aircraft to initiate maneuvers. And as you can see, the roll, the pitch, and the yaw are all contingent upon the center of gravity point. Now, in regard to the mechanical devices or the flight control surfaces that manipulate the aircraft's movement, well, you can see that there are quite a few of them here, but you will primarily only be concerned about three. First one is the rudder. The next one will be the elevators, and the third will be the ailerons. Those are the three that you need to pay attention to. And as I go back to the first diagram, you can see that those three components or those three flight control systems are on the diagram, and they control or manipulate a specific access line. The rudder at the tail of the aircraft is what controls the yaw. So you can see that the yaw is on a vertical access point. So if you can imagine just flapping the rudder from left to right on a vertical access line, that is what will allow the aircraft to yaw. So you can see that it's marked on a diagram that the yaw rate is controlled and manipulated by the rudder. That is the Part 107 exam question that has now been answered. And coincidingly, if you're being asked a question such as, what controls the pitch of an aircraft on a lateral axis, well, that's going to be as marked the elevators located on the tail wings. And lastly, what flight control surface manipulates an airplane to roll? Well, that's marked also as the ailerons located on the main wings. So do you see how I just simply broke this down in detail? A question that you more than likely would have answered incorrectly if I had not uncovered this important information. Now let's talk about MEFs and uncover the myth behind this topic. And you can thank Sarah for bringing this to our attention. MEF stands for Maximum Elevation Figure, and it's mainly used on aviational charts, such as sectional charts, to tell the pilot what the highest elevation in regard to terrain or an obstacle may be within a certain grid, or what we refer to as quadrants. Now, do you see those big blue numbers around the airport that I'm pointing to right now? Well, those are MEF values, and each one of those numbers are within a 30-minute by 30 30-minute grid. Now, if I count the number of grids that I can visibly see, well, I can see 6 of them. Let me show you. Do you see how I separated the latitude and longitude lines? And there are basically 6 of those quadrants, right? And each one of those is 30 minutes by 30 minutes in regard to latitude and longitude lines. And just one of those sections is referred to as a quadrant. And every quadrant on your sectional chart will have an MEF value. Now, I want you to understand this. Within each quadrant, there is something such as a mountain or a tower or an obstacle or a building. There is something that is higher than anything else inside of that quadrant. And you notice that I'm pointing to the big 10 and the little 4. And the big number is measured in thousands and the little number is measured in hundreds. So this would be 10,400 feet. And this will be likewise for all of the other MEF numbers that you'll see on a sectional chart. Now, before I get to the actual Part 107 question on the exam, let me explain something to you so you're not confused. MEFs are not enforced by the FAA. They're not law. There's no minimum legal altitude. Those numbers don't have anything to do with how high you can fly or how low you can go. MEFs are on sectional charts as a safety reference only. So when you hear the question asking what is the minimum elevation to clear an obstacle in a quadrant, this is not FAA rule. This is a safety reference only. And we've uncovered that one. So now let's get to the FAA Part 107 question on the exam. Refer to Figure 80. What minimum elevation should a manned aircraft pilot fly to clear all obstacles in the quadrant surrounding Montrose Regional Airport? That's MTJ, question mark. Now, before your brain even thinks about answering the question, set your mind to evaluating or analyzing the question first. The question says, what minimum elevation should a manned aircraft fly to clear all obstacles in the quadrant? What the question really is asking is this: what altitude should you stay above when flying within the quadrant surrounding Montrose Regional Airport, MTJ? It's the same exact question, only I configured it so that way it's easier to answer. Always keep this profound statement in your mind. You can't easily answer a difficult question, so make it easy for yourself. Let's go look at the quadrant for where Montrose Airport is located. Now use your sectional charts to see if you can determine what quadrant they're in, and you should have an MEF value within that quadrant. And what number did you get? I hope it was 11,700 or 11,700 feet. And at that altitude or above is when you know you can fly safely without crashing into a tall building or the side of a mountain. How about that? You already know about the rules and regulations for consuming alcohol, but what about drugs or over-the-counter medication? The rule of thumb, according to the FAA regulations, is that if the drug or medication that you're using is affecting your mental or physical faculties, then you are in fact impaired. Over-the-counter medication, especially if you mix it with alcohol, will put you in a condition where you will not be able to operate a drone safely. And you should already know that you can't fly within 8 hours of consuming alcohol. 0.04 will be the blood alcohol content limit. RPIC is always responsible, and you cannot refuse to submit to a blood alcohol test. Now let's touch on something that has not been discussed. Part 107 rules for the use of marijuana. And there are 3 exam questions that we are going to uncover right now. First question: when can someone with a marijuana conviction apply for a remote pilot certificate? Will it be A, never, B, 18 months, or C, 1 year? Any conviction with a violation of federal or state statutes relating to growing, possessing, manufacturing, sale, distribution, possession, or transportation of marijuana, that means that your application will be denied until 1 year after the date of conviction. Next question: if you are caught smoking marijuana, the FAA will A, recommend a drug treatment facility, B, issue an immediate suspension of your remote pilot certificate, or C, deny all future remote pilot applications. And of course, the correct answer in this scenario is B. And as you can see, I've pulled up the statute 14 CFR 107.57. It clearly states conviction and marijuana is mentioned. But the last point that I uncovered was that it doesn't say anything about the medical use of marijuana. And I could not find that anywhere. But can the FAA enforce that rule? So I needed to go to the Code of Federal Regulations and understand that the FAA abides by federal law. And as I scroll through all of the controlled substances, I just happened to come across the one that I was looking for, marijuana, and look, they spelt this incorrectly. Do you know why this is not spelt with a J? It's because in 1937 they adopted the Marijuana Tax Act, and it stayed this way in the federal system for all of these years. But basically, this is a controlled substance, it's federal law, and the FAA does not have any exemptions for medical use of marijuana. So if they want to enforce it, they can do that not under Part 107, but under federal law. Now let's talk about air masses and fronts and uncover some of the information that has not been covered. So let's define and describe air masses first. An air mass is a large region of air that will take on the characteristics of the area of which it is surrounding. For example, if an air mass forms over a body of water, it will be a warm and moist air mass. Or if a large air mass forms over a region that is usually cold and dry, then that is the characteristic it will take on. And again, if a large air mass is over a desert, it will take on the characteristic of being hot and dry. Now, what is so important to understand is that these air masses, as they form, they also move. An air mass is not stationary. It can move from water to land or land to water or over regions. And as they move from one area to another with different climates, different temperatures, and different characteristics, they take on the characteristics of where they are currently, and they change. I can describe a large air mass as a giant chameleon. It changes its color or changes its characteristic based on what it is around or the surrounding area. Now, as the air masses move, they will eventually, logically, collide, or they will run into each other. And understand that each air mass has a boundary or a wall around it. And as the walls of these different air masses come in contact with each other, each air mass will try to take on the characteristics of the other. And that system or interaction of one wall touching another wall is called a front. For example, a warm air mass coming in contact with a cold air mass, the boundary in between the two air masses is called a front. And this is where things can get dangerous because you have two different types of air masses now clashing with each other. The first type of front is called a cold front, and this is where cold air pushes warm air up fast, and with this you can expect thunderstorms and gusty winds. The second type of front is called a warm front, and warm air will glide over cold air, and this will bring steady rain or low clouds. The third type of front is called a stationary front, where the air masses simply don't move. They just sit there, and it leads to lingering rain and clouds. And the last type of front is what's called an occluded front, where the cold air actually takes over the warm air, and this can cause unpredictable and complex weather. A very important point here to make is that cold air fronts and cold air masses will move much faster than warm air fronts or warm air masses. So whenever it is that you hear a cold front, you better think about the fact that it's moving faster, and it will often bring severe weather. So if you're about to fly a drone and you just happen to hear cold fronts, well, that should put a red flag right in front of your face in regard to your drone operations. So let me ask you this question. What is the most recognizable thing that's going to occur when you have a cold front next to a warm front? And I just gave you the answer in the question. It's not going to be humidity or cloud cover. It's going to be a rapid change in temperature. The easiest discernible factor in regard to a front is the temperature change. And what other discernible factor will be present in a front? I'll tell you. It will be wind, because whenever you have warm air meeting cold air, there will always be the movement of air. Warm air mixing with cold air generates the movement of air. You will notice that the shifting in wind direction and the speed and the velocity will be recognizable when we're referring to a front. So what you should remember for the Part 107 exam is that the boundary of air in between two different air masses is called a front. Now, just on a very important note here, I want to bring this to your attention. A cold front will stay closer to the ground. So logically, if you remember in my previous videos, cold air will descend, warm air will rise. So if the cold front is staying closer to the ground, it's naturally going to push the warm air up. Now, you all know what happens when warm air rises. Of course you do. Warm, moist air rising creates clouds. And those clouds, if they continue to be fueled by the warm, moist air rising, will turn into cumulus clouds. And a cumulus cloud is the first stage of a thunderstorm. So you can see how a cold front moving is the most contributing factor when it is in regard to storm conditions. This information is very important for you in regard to the Part 107 exam because you won't find this information and it's not explained or articulated enough for you to grasp a full understanding. Let's talk about the rules and regulations when you're considering flying over people. And just so you know, you're not allowed to fly over people unless your drone qualifies into one of 4 categories. But before I go into detail, I want to express something to you. Flying over people without understanding FAA's rules is one of the fastest ways to violate Part 107, but the FAA has created clear categories to help you whenever it is that you need to fly over people. Now, in the old school days, meaning before 2021, the general rule was you don't fly over people unless you have a waiver. This made it extremely difficult for commercial pilots whenever they were doing film events or construction or flying in urban areas. Extremely frustrating for commercial pilots, but now that rule has been updated. And all you need to do is to comply with one of the 4 categories and you will be able to fly over people without having to request a waiver. And I just noted on screen FAA violations. But it seems as though he's flying the drone recreationally, but I'll uncover this for you so you know. Recreational drone flyers in the US are not flying under Part 107. They are under Title 49 US Code 44809, which is federal law, and Part 107 rules do not apply to recreational flyers, but there are still violations in this scenario. We'll get back to that in just a minute. So now that I made that clear, let's go over the 4 categories in detail so you fully understand not only what's required of you when you're flying commercially, but what's required whenever it is that you're asked a question on the Part 107 exam. Category number 1, a drone weighing 0.55 pounds, which is 250 grams or less. This is a small drone like the DJI Mini series. In order to fly over people at this weight specification for category number 1, none of the rotors or blades can be exposed. And even if the drone weighs less than 250 grams, you will still need to make sure that your drone is remote ID compliant. And going back to the previous example, even if you're a recreational flyer, you can't fly over people unless you fall into one of the 4 categories. And you know something? I don't think I would take the risk or chance of flying that big drone over those poor little children's heads without having the appropriate propeller guards properly installed. And the last requirement for Category 1 is that the drone must comply with remote ID rules and regulations. And the only exception where remote ID would not be required is if you are flying in an FAA-recognized identification area, or FRIA. And there's something else that you won't hear too often, and that is a term that is referenced in the U.S. Department of Transportation Advisory Circular, and that term is called open air assemblies. What this means is that if you see a large crowd or a group of people or a large gathering, you are prohibited from flying what's called a sustained flight over open air assemblies. And what they're referring to when they say sustained flight is that you can't just hover or float your drone over people. It has to be constantly moving in motion. You can't hover over people no matter what category you're flying in. It says that right here on the advisory circular. Prohibited. Keep in mind the huge safety factor that all people must be under protective cover. You're about to get a remote pilot certificate. There is a huge responsibility behind that. And do you see how I uncover all of these details? Because it is important. So now that you understand category 1, let's go to category number 2. And this applies to any drone that weighs more than 0.55 pounds and less than 55 pounds. These drones are slightly bigger and heavier, so therefore, Category 2 is primarily concerned about how much injury or damage the drone will cause if it either crashes onto property or if it impacts a person. So there is a requirement for this consideration, where Category 2 says that a drone must not cause injury greater than 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Now, I know that you all don't know how to measure kinetic energy, but I'm going to give you an example. A 12-ounce can of soda weighs about 370 grams. Now, if someone threw the soda can at you at about 10 to 15 miles per hour, you would feel the impact, but it won't break any bones, right? That soda can that just hit you impacted your body at about 3 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Now, imagine if that soda can was traveling 25 miles per hour, then we'd be talking about an impact of 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. And as dramatic as that sounds, it's still not enough to cause serious injury such as breaking bones or penetrating the skin or a loss of consciousness. So Category 2 must not cause injury greater than 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. You can't have exposed rotating parts, so put those propeller guards on there. Remember the kids. You must have remote ID compliance and also uncovered information. You must have the MOC, which is the means of compliance from the manufacturer. That will give you all of the technical information about your drone so you can submit the DOC to the FAA online. And DOC stands for Declaration of Compliance. Let's move to Category 3. And this category is going to be very easy for you to remember because it's almost exactly like Category 2 with only one exception. It's not 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Category 3 is 25 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. And this time, instead of a soda can, think of getting punched by a trained boxer. That hit is going to be about 20 to 30 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Well, that is very similar to a 1-pound drone falling from the sky at 30 to 35 miles per hour, and the impact of that drone will definitely be more than 25 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. And lastly, Category 4. This is for industrial-type drones, the bigger drones, and for this one, it is the only category that requires that you must have an FAA airworthiness certificate. So on the Part 107 exam, you will see the question that will ask you which category requires an FAA airworthiness certificate, and you already know that answer. Category 4 is the only category that requires an FAA airworthiness certificate, and mark that as one more question that you will answer correctly. Studying for the Part 107 exam is extremely difficult, and what makes it even more difficult is not knowing for yourself if you're deficient in a certain area. Now, those of you who have already taken the Part 107 exam, there are some questions that you answered incorrectly, and those incorrect answers are given a specific code. Now, realistically, it's reasonable to assume that if you did not get a 100% passing grade on your exam, that means that you did not retain the information 100%. So I'm going to uncover the ACS or Airman Certification Standard codes. So when it's time for you to actually take the Part 107 exam again, or you need to take your reoccurrent exam, you'll be able to receive a much higher score because you will now be aware of the areas that you're deficient in, and also you'll know what questions you answered incorrectly on the exam. So this is the Remote Pilot Small Unmanned Aircraft Systems Airman Certification Systems. I put the link in the description for you for your convenience. And here is where you'll be able to match the codes for the incorrect answers that you got on your test report, and it will provide you with not only the chapter but also the topic area of what it is that you're having difficulty understanding. Now I'm going to give a shout out to my subscriber Kenneth. You missed 2 in this specific area. This is the Part 107 Regulations General area, and the 2 that you missed I'm going to mark on screen right now, and I will give you 2 questions that you will need need to answer for those two areas so that you will understand what it is you need to pay attention to when you have to retake the Part 107 exam. So a question that they would ask on this type of code, K5, would be, when requested by the FAA, a remote pilot in command must A. refuse to submit the aircraft for inspection unless a warrant is present, B. immediately ground the aircraft and disable the control station, C. make the aircraft available for inspection or testing and provide any required documents. Now, as easy as this question seems, if you did not study this question, then you have a 50-50 chance of getting this correct. And that's because when they wrote this exam, they made sure that they put the question that is the most appropriate at the end. So that way you had to read the other two questions and it will confuse you. A is obviously ridiculous, and they know that you would go to the next answer, which doesn't seem as ridiculous, and you would probably choose B if I didn't just tell you the answer. But the answer is, when you're requested by the FAA for whatever reason it may be, the first thing that you got to give them is your registration and your certificate. And make sure that when they go to pick up that drone to inspect it, that registration number is somewhere on the side of that drone. Do you see why 40% of the people have difficulty passing this exam? But not if I'm breaking it down to you this way, right? And when I'm dead and gone, you will remember what I just taught you. Take a look at the top ACS code K1, applicable of 14 CFR Part 107 to small unmanned aircraft operations. And here is the type of question that they would give you for this code. Which of the following operations is regulated under 14 CFR Part 107? Now, I don't have to read all of the answers. You can read them for yourself on screen. But what I want to do while you're reading the answers and choosing the appropriate answer, I want to explain something to you. The FAA will try to trip you up, and they are assuming that you should know certain things. For example, even if you studied, would you know that a .5 toy drone for recreational purposes is not covered under Part 107? Or C, an agricultural drone weighing 45 pounds is going to weigh much more than that because it has to carry a large amount of chemical fluids? It's reasonable to assume that the reason why you answered this question incorrectly was because the other two choices seem to be correct. Let me give you a little advice. When all three of the answers seem to be somewhat close, choose the one that is the closest. And the correct answer would be B, a 12-pound drone to capture aerial footage for real estate and get paid for it. And let me just add one more thing. Spraying chemicals with a drone, regardless of weight, will usually fall under Part 137. I just wanted to let you know that. Search for this study guide FAA-G-8082-22. This is the Remote Pilot SUAS study guide, and I'll have the link in my description so you can download it. On page 58, figure 9.2, you're going to find something called vision and flight scanning techniques. And this area has a high percentage of the questions being answered incorrectly. And that's because when you're studying, you're not really interested in the things that appear to be trivial, but every single correct answer counts. So I'll go over this concisely so at least you'll know what the correct answer should be. Now, looking at this material from the FAA, this is one of those scratch your head, I don't know what the heck they're talking about with this information. It's written in a way where only a deranged person would understand it. So the reason that I'm doing this is to give you a visual breakdown of what exactly it is that they mean. And in all fairness to the FAA, let me go ahead and read what they wrote. To scan effectively, pilots must look from right to left or left to right. They should begin scanning the greatest distance an object can be perceived top and move inward towards the position of the aircraft bottom. For each stop, an area approximately 30 degrees wide should be scanned. The duration of each stop is based on the degree of detail that is required, but no stop should last longer than 2 to 3 seconds. When moving from one viewing point to the next, pilots should overlap the previous field of view by 10 degrees. Now, I take pride in my reading and comprehension, but I'm going to tell you, honestly, I did not understand what I just read. So I'm going to take the time now to break this thing down for myself. The best way to understand this is by asking yourself a question. When you're in the library and you're looking for a book, how do your eyes move or scan when you're looking for that book? You're not going to go all the way to the left at the beginning of the shelf and then quickly scan all the way to the right at the end of the shelf. Your eyes are going to to scan in segments. Let me give you a better analogy for what the FAA is trying to explain. The pattern that they're referring to when you're scanning from left to right at the furthest distance, then you're scanning from right to left at the closest distance, is a proven method not only to reduce eye fatigue, but to eliminate tunnel vision as well. But more importantly, when your eyes are fixed on a single point and you don't move your eyes or scan, your eyes will begin to relax and they will lose the ability to focus or even detect motion. You'll develop tunnel vision and your brain will begin to tune itself out from what it is that you're actually seeing. Scan from left to right on a 30-degree area at the furthest distance. Continue scanning with a 10-degree overlap on the previous area. Change your distance from furthest to closest and continue scanning from right to left with the same technique. I'll make you a bet that the FAA is watching this video and they're going to rewrite what it is that they wrote. This is why I break it down for you so it's easy to understand. So now let me show you what question they're going to have on the exam. When scanning the sky for traffic, how should the remote PIC or visual observer perform the scan? A. Continuously sweep the sky in a circular motion. B. Rapidly scan above and below the horizon for movement. Or C. Use a series of short regular eye movements to search each sector. Now be honest with yourself. If I didn't go over this, would you have answered this correctly? The correct answer is C. Use a series of short regular eye movements to search each sector. And Kenneth, this was also one of your codes on your test report. And in regard to all of you who are interested in taking the Part 107 exam, don't schedule the exam until you have enough information under your belt. Having a deadline or a date will stress you out, especially if you have not begun studying for the exam. The FAA recommends that you have at least 15 to 20 hours of study time, but since we all learn differently and at different rates, those times can vary drastically. There are some very profound words I can give you before you actually schedule the exam. When you think you know everything, that's the moment that you realize that you know absolutely nothing. Challenge yourself by saying there's always more to learn. Use as many resources that you have available, and always keep in mind that you can do this. You got this. The exam is very easy when you have all of the information articulated correctly. This was 12 of 12, the last video in this series, and after you pass the Part 107 exam, you're still going to need to learn more. What channel is going to give you the best detailed information on how to set up your drone, the best settings for aerial photography, how to get your drone business up and running, and don't forget, in 24 months you have the FAA Recurrent Training course. Subscribe to this channel, ring the notification bell, and I want to thank you all for your support, your donations. More videos are on the way, and we will see you on the next video.